Good afternoon. Welcome to the July monthly policy update. We will be getting started in just one moment. Still gathering.
Hello.
Hi, Jessica. We have just begun, so we're going to get started with the July monthly policy update. How are you doing today, Jessica?
I'm doing great. How are you doing?
Good, good. So again, welcome to all of you. I'm Ben Kershaw. I'm the Director of Public Policy and Government Relations at Independent Sector. And if this is your first time with us, you should know we're a nationwide organization comprised of nonprofits, foundations, and corporate giving programs, all working to ensure that all people living in the United States thrive. Your lines are muted now. We'll pause for questions, but you're welcome to please submit them through the chat or the Q&A function at your convenience. Before we start, I want to respectfully acknowledge that today I'm joining you from Wilmington, North Carolina at my brother-in-law's. This is originally the land of the Wakama, Catawba, and the Cape Fear people who are still in the area working to reclaim their land and their traditional practices. Wherever you are joining us from, welcome. We're so glad to have you on these waning days of July. And I'm joined today by Jessica Cameron at Washington Counsel Ernst & Young, our trusted partner, and also by my government relations colleague, Manuel Gomez at Independent Sector. I want to turn things over to Jessica to tell us what is going on. We often joke about how the single best way to get some breaking news in Washington is to schedule an Independent Sector monthly policy update. And we were all expecting that streak to be broken this month. Thought we were going to have a sleepy little closeout to July for you. And I won't steal Jessica's thunder. So Jessica, is it going to be a sleepy little closeout to July, or was we limp into August, or is there anything going on we should know about?
Anything simmering. Yeah, I think for a lot of people in Washington, including myself, the thought was that this would be a somewhat quiet August, given that things had kind of come to a halt on reconciliation negotiations, weren't really going to see any major push over August, and that does not seem to be the case. I think the best way to describe this scenario is, as Ron Burgundy put it, we're kind of in a glass case of emotion these last few weeks, and even a lot has happened in the last 24 hours. So let me kind of take you through a little bit of background of what we've been seeing over the past few weeks, a broad outline of what we've seen in the bill that just dropped, kind of, deal struck with Senator Schumer and Senator Manchin, and then kind of prospects for what that looks like. So a few weeks ago, Manchin had made clear at the beginning of or mid-July that negotiations that he was having with Senator Schumer, Majority Leader Schumer, on moving forward with some type of reconciliation package weren't going that great, at least on the green energy and tax increase pieces that they had previously talked about. If you remember last year, we were talking about a very a large reconciliation package that ended up passing out of the House, but ended up not stalling in the Senate because of Manchin. Remember, there's only there's a 50-50 vote split in the Senate right now, and so Democrats need every single vote in order to move forward with reconciliation. So instead, the idea was, or what we've heard from Manchin and Schumer was that they would go forward with something on ACA healthcare subsidies that are expiring very soon. So nothing really like Build Back Better, but really just a smaller package focused on that piece. Now, I should also note that Republican Majority Leader McConnell had made some statements, had made very clear that Senate Republicans wouldn't vote on a different bill that the Senate and Congress has been working on, which is the CHIPS Act. It provides some subsidies for the semiconductor industry, so kind of a separate issue. but that they wouldn't lend their support to that bill if Democrats continued forward with reconciliation with kind of the broader package they were looking at. Again, to focus on tax increases, green energy is kind of the way I think about it. So what happened? So with reconciliation off the table, or kind of the larger bill off the table, Congress turned its attention to chips, and it passed out of the Senate recently with bipartisan support. The question now is whether it'll pass through the House. This leads us, I guess, to the upswell of yesterday afternoon. Yesterday, we got a press release from Senator Joe Manchin saying that he and Schumer had struck a deal on a reconciliation package, and we got the text last night. So they had struck a deal that included those pieces that were previously taken out of the bill, looking at green energy, as well as some limited tax increases as well. To say people were surprised in DC, I think is an understatement. I know that we've been on the Hill with other clients, talking to a number of Democrats on the Senate side specifically, and they were pretty sure that, this wasn't going forward. We were going to have a much more quiet August. And folks were really kind of more focused on an end of the year package, something that they were kind of gearing up for, with the assumption that reconciliation is now dead. That doesn't seem to be the issue now. Now we kind of have this large bill that I know that our office is going through, as well as IS is going through. But let me give you just a broad overview of what's in the package, and then just a quick takeaway. So what's in there? Broadly speaking, there's kind of a few revenue raisers in the bill. One being a 15% minimum tax on corporations. Remember, corporations have different book and tax books. And so as a result, it puts a floor on kind of what corporations would pay in federal income taxes. There's also some prescription drug pricing reform as far as negotiations with regards to drug prices for Medicare, some increased revenue from some IRS enforcement, as well as fixing the carried interest loophole. Then on the spending side, there are a number of green energy provisions. A number of them should look very familiar with what was in the House-passed version of BBB last fall, as well as the extension for certain ACA subsidies. If you look at kind of add up the numbers, there's also about $300 billion, and that's for debt financing. So that decreases the debt with that number. I think if there's a takeaway, I think two things I should say. One is that one is related to managing expectations about the bill, about what's in the bill, and then managing expectations about what happens to the bill, because I think those are two separate pieces. First, about what's in the bill, it's certainly not the large bill that was passed by the House last fall. And I know for the nonprofit sector, there are a number of provisions that that folks are really championing that are not in this current bill. So thinking of the child tax credit, child care provisions, education, for example, it's really more about, at least for the part that affects nonprofit sector is really those green energy provisions and potentially those ACA healthcare subsidies. So that's one thing to just keep in mind. The second thing is what will happen to their bill. Remember that this was a deal between Senator Manchin and Majority Leader Schumer, and so you still need all 50 to sign on here. And so it really begs the question whether Senator Sinema, one of the other moderate Democrats in the Senate, will end up supporting it. We know, for example, that she has been less than enthusiastic about some of the provisions in there, particularly the carried interest loophole. So, I think it remains to be seen whether she'll end up supporting the bill. Recently, she put out some statements that, she's reading through the bill like everyone else, and she'll come to a decision soon. So those are things to keep in mind. Last thing I'll mention is that I know that they were looking to potentially put this on the floor sooner rather than later. We've gotten some news recently that for bird bath purposes, that Senate Republicans will have a few days to read through the bill and then present any arguments they have to the parliamentarian if there are any violations that the bill has under the bird rule. So I'll stop there. I know there's a lot to take in, and I know Ben might want to have some specific, conversation about specific provisions, but happy to answer any questions at the moment.
Thank you, Jessica. That's great. And as you refer to the bird bath and the bird rule, right? These are the special strictures that Democrats need to deal with if they want to pass this legislation with only 50 votes through budget reconciliation processes, right? To avoid the filibuster. So there's lots we could dig in on process, on content, even on strategy. But I will reiterate Jessica's point that folks are welcome to submit questions. Jessica, I do want to start by flagging a couple other substantive things that we've, in our review over the last 16 hours of this text, have found that could be of potential interest to the nonprofit sector. So, I think one thing, and this is section 13303, that could be of interest, is an area that nonprofits have been tracking, and the Nonprofit Infrastructure Investment Advocacy Group have been tracking about energy efficiency for buildings. And historically, a lot of tax credits that Congress creates have not done much for nonprofit organizations who do not have income tax liabilities. So interestingly, this credit that is restructured by the legislation would be able to be allocated or essentially sold if that building is owned by a nonprofit. So that's a way that would allow nonprofits to benefit from this, this commercial buildings energy efficiency credit. One small, potential silver lining we see amidst a number of the disappointments that Jessica alluded to. A kind of a wide range of investments in resilience, whether that's resilience of coastal communities or the National Park Service, forestry. Resilience has been another focus of the civic infrastructure agenda that some of us have been advocating for. And then the last thing I did want to flag is that legislation, and this is in section 60501, does provide an additional $3 billion for what are called neighborhood access and equity grants. And if that legislative speak doesn't mean too much to you off the top of your head, that is some of the funding that is used to correct inequitable transportation infrastructure of the past. The president has alluded to highways built through predominantly neighborhoods of color that have been, not just useless to those neighborhoods, but have actively harmed those neighborhoods. So we were really thrilled to see funding in the infrastructure bill in the past, infrastructure law for some of that activity. And, there is an additional $3 billion for it in this. So that's just some of the content highlights I would flag for folks. And I guess while we're still on content, yes, we're disappointed not to see childcare money in there, not to see additional broadband funding, not to see national service and workforce development and civilian climate corps, all things that IS advocated for that passed the House in the House version of this legislation, not in there. So I won't pepper you, Jessica, with complaints about why those things aren't in there. We're all going to continue working for them. From a process perspective, it struck me as curious that this deal was announced like 6 hours after Senate Republicans had delivered bipartisan votes to pass the legislation. Do you think there's anything to read into that timing, and and how will that timing influence, for example, the House that still needs to pass the semiconductor legislation? How do you think that's going to play out?
Yes, it's definitely impressively sneaky, or we definitely had our eye on that for a number of folks in our office. Certainly, I mentioned that McConnell had drawn a line in the sand and said, we're not moving through chips if you continue to go through with reconciliation. And so shortly thereafter, whether that was because of what McConnell said or not, negotiations kind of fell through with Manchin and with Schumer. They ended up passing CHIPS, and then surprisingly, a few hours later, as you mentioned, they come up with a deal on reconciliation. I wouldn't put it past them that had something to do with it, that strategy. Obviously, it's interesting. Manchin, for a lot of this, has been down with COVID, so he's been doing a lot of things through Zoom. So I suspect that something kind of happened there as well. So I wouldn't put it past them that was kind of part of the strategy, but I guess we can only wait for everyone's political memoirs to come out to really get the inside scoop. It does lead to an interesting question, though, about the CHIPS Act, which, again, mostly focused on the semiconductor industry. It has just moved over to the House side from the Senate side. And so the question is whether they'll be able to pass it in the House, given what just happened. Certainly, there are a number of House Republicans that have, huge footprints in their district that rely on semiconductors or different industries, and were supportive of having some type of bill move forward on this. Right now, I know we've gotten a lot of indications from House leadership that they are not supportive of the bill now because of what happened. I think the question will be if Democrats will be able to pass the bill on their own. I think that remains to be seen. So still up in the air, but certainly doesn't help the cause for moving forward in the House, a bill that just got through in the Senate.
Got it. Never a dull moment. Before we turn to another update from Manuel, I do have a question for you, Jessica. Right, in addition to some of those civic infrastructure priorities that are not in this version of the bill, there are a number of other things that the sector has been actively advocating for. Things like restoring and expanding the charitable deduction for every American. Retroactively restoring the fourth quarter of the employee retention tax credit. A lot of things that could fall into the tax space. It's unfortunate, though maybe not surprising, not to see some of those things dealt with in this legislation. What do you think the outlook is for some of that stuff? Assuming we're now into August and therefore into the fall, what's the outlook for getting some of that done? Right, there's elections in the fall. Do those have any impact on how that might play out? What's your thinking about opportunities for the charitable sector on those issues?
Certainly. So I'll say, before all of this happened last afternoon, Congress was really focused. We talked to a lot of staff. They're starting to gear up as far as what their priorities would be as far as a year-end bill. As you know, there are a number of provisions that have expired or are about to expire, and that lends itself well at the end of each year for some type of end of the year kind of cleanup bill, if you will. We reference it. And so because reconciliation up until yesterday afternoon didn't look like it was going anywhere, there were a number of Democrats on the Senate and House side that were thinking about putting in provisions that into an end of the year bill that they couldn't get into reconciliation. And so we've heard a lot about putting, for example, the temporary UCD bill that Walorski and others are on, maybe include that in an end of the year bill, as well as some other items on the green energy side. When we talked to staff, I think there was an acknowledgement that this could be a pretty large bill. For example, if the child tax credit is in that bill, which is from a JCT kind of scoring perspective, rather expensive, it could lend itself to having a number of other provisions being included that Republicans would like in order to make it a bipartisan bill. It could also be something that's just straight extensions, maybe something a little bit smaller. There's also, I think, an acknowledgement that there could also be the potential that nothing happens at the end of the year and it kind of all blows up. So kind of a wide range of possibilities. But certainly I think there's a willingness to have some type of bill that would include provisions in there that didn't get into reconciliation. now that reconciliation seems to be moving, I think that calls into question what that end of the year package will look like. Certainly, as you mentioned, there still are a lot of provisions that aren't in this bill, and then you could potentially see some of them being picked up and put into an end of the year bill. I think that's certainly still a possibility. I would say that it'll come down to the next few weeks as we see what happens with reconciliation, whether that moves forward, and then what the appetite looks like, ultimately to do another year-end bill, additional tax and other spending provisions in December. Finally, I'll just say, obviously we have, elections in November, and it certainly looks like, at least on the House side, Republicans are likely to take the majority. The Senate looks like a little up in question. It could be another 50-50 split or something very close to it on either side. So we'll see kind of how that plays out. But certainly, for a lot of Democrats, this is kind of a time to hopefully get something passed this year that maybe potentially won't be able to get passed next year if Republicans take control. So certainly in the next few weeks, I think will be very telling here.
Got it. Thank you. Yeah, right. For those of us who are rooting for the opportunity to advance things at the end of the year, a bipartisan holiday spirit seems like it's going to need to be kindled. Okay. I want to turn now to Manuel for an update. I mentioned broadband funding as something that's not in the current Manchin-Schumer bill, but there are some good things happening around broadband. So, Manuel.
Thank you, Ben. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for our monthly webinar. The Federal Communications Commission is promoting resources to help communities to access high-speed internet at low cost. It's a way to help cut costs while raising the cost of living that all the US is suffering right now. If any household in your network is eligible, could receive up to $30 per month discount on their internet service, up to $75 per month discount of their household if they qualify in tribal lands, a one-time discount up to $100 for laptops, tablets, desktop computers, or another devices, or they can cover a full price if any person or any household in your community has a low-cost service. In the chat, I just shared the ACP Consumer Outreach Toolkit. This contains a lot of tools like videos, infographics, flyers, and a lot of information that allow us to find how access the program and enable us to share this opportunity to access these benefits with our network. Most of this information is in English, Spanish, ESL, Chinese, Korean, tribal English, and more, and making it a valuable resource of information to support our communities. If you have any questions or comments, please email us, and we are so glad to explore how we can support you. Thank you, and we will return to you, Ben.
Thank you, Manuel. Before I pause to see if people have questions about Jessica's year-end update or about the Affordable Connectivity Program, one final update from us on an issue that has been on the nonprofit sector's radar recently on the charitable mileage rate for volunteer drivers. Regular listeners will remember that Congressman Stauber introduced legislation in June to temporarily increase the rate. And now he has also signed on to other legislation from Representative Angie Craig, also a Minnesotan, called the Tax Emergency Adjustment for Mileage Volunteers. That's Team Volunteers Act. Good work, acronym staffers. And this is more positive legislation than Congressman Stauber's bill, in that it would increase the charitable reimbursement rate from its current 14 cents, which is set in statute, to 62.5 cents per mile for a 2-year period. That 62.5 cents per mile is the rate for business mileage. And so for at least 2 years, it would set that rate at parity for volunteers who were donating mileage in their own vehicle. After that 2-year period, the bill would increase it slightly from its current 14-cent rate and index it to inflation. And I'll put that link into the chat as well, to their press release about it. So more acknowledgement and hopefully a little bit more momentum on an issue that is causing a lot of pain out in the volunteer community. Gas prices and everything else people are facing. So encouraging developments. I want to pause one time for questions about the information you've heard today. We know you have a lot of ways that you could spend sunny late July Thursday afternoons, and we are honored that you choose to spend them with us. We will not have a monthly policy update in August, barring unforeseen circumstances, but we know that we'll be talking to many of you in the days and weeks to come. Thanks for joining us. Thank you, Jessica. Thank you, Manuel. And go get them. We'll talk to you soon.